Bueno, vamos a iniciar entonces esta charla de los efectos de las relaciones inalámbricas en la salud de los niños. Nos vamos a hacer hoy día la pregunta si es inocuo su uso. Este seminario virtual está siendo organizado por la agrupación civil Unidos por una Tecnología Responsable, que es una entidad sin fines de lucro que está constituida por profesionales de distintas áreas del quehacer social y trabaja para generar conciencias en relación a todos los daños que pueden ser provocados por las radiaciones artificiales inalámbricas y su impacto en la salud de las personas, los ecosistemas y las comunidades. Este seminario también está patrocinado por Environmental Health Trust, que es una institución no gubernamental estadounidense que está enfocada en la investigación de la salud ambiental, asesora y apoya las políticas de educación pública acerca de los peligros emergentes para la salud ambiental y su impacto en la salud de los seres humanos y todos los seres vivos, cuya fundadora es la doctora Debra Davis. Además, tenemos la colaboración del Colegio Médico de Aysén, el regional Coyhaique, que ha apoyado con la difusión y todo esto dentro de un impulso de desarrollar el enfoque de la humanización e integralidad en salud y también en concordancia con una constante preocupación por la salud medioambiental y de las comunidades. ¿Ya? Ahora quisiera darle una breve reseña de nuestro expositor, el doctor Robert Brown. Él tiene una vasta trayectoria clínica en la clínica Cleveland y el Hospital de Enfermedades Articulares de la Universidad de Nueva York. Y él es presidente de Investigación Científica y Asuntos Clínicos de Environmental Health Trust, EHT. Y en esta institución el doctor Brown desempeña un rol esencial en el avance de las investigaciones y educación pública sobre los efectos de las toxinas ambientales en la salud, sobre todo en los campos electromagnéticos y otras formas de radiación no ionizante. Su creciente conocimiento de cómo los factores ambientales influyen en la salud ha forjado un compromiso en enseñar a otros cómo reducir esta exposición a estas emisiones tóxicas en la vida diaria. Por ejemplo, él ha publicado una recopilación de su investigación y su experiencia en un libro que se llama Hogar Tóxico, Hogar Consciente, un enfoque consciente para el bienestar en el hogar, donde él va a explorar los distintos efectos nocivos de estas radiaciones ambientales en los espacios cotidianos, dando medidas prácticas para ir reduciendo estas emisiones tóxicas del medio ambiente. ¿Ya? Además, como instructor del Instituto de Aprendizaje Permanente de Ocher de la Universidad de Carnegie Mellon, capacita a los adultos para reconocer y abordar los riesgos ambientales en salud. ¿Ya? Bueno, si quieren también él tiene una página web, Robert Brown MD, donde pueden visitar también sus aportes en esta área. Así que los dejo muy bienvenidos y los dejo con el doctor Robert Brown.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Anna. Appreciate that. And thank you to everybody at the Unidos por Tecnología Responsable for inviting me to speak today. It really is an honor, and I am very passionate about this subject, so I'm very happy to be able to share with you my insights and what I've learned about this. So let me share my screen. Okay. So to start, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I am a diagnostic radiologist. That's my career. I've been working for over 30 years in this field. And so actually, I spend my days looking at images created by exposing the human body to different forms of radiation. We have X-rays that create chest X-rays and bone X-rays, and as well as CAT scans. We have gamma rays that are used to produce images for bone scans and PET scans. And we have a technology called MRI, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. in which we put a person's body in a strong magnetic field and bombard them with radio frequency radiation to get images, because the radiation penetrates into the body and it actually affects the protons within the atoms in our cells. It's very interesting physics. It's a complex field, and this is really going to be a little bit technical in some spots, but I'm going to give you a brief overview of the physics that you need to understand in order to really grasp what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about how life actually evolved within electromagnetic fields on Earth, and so they're not necessarily a bad thing. We need electromagnetic fields to exist, but it's the human-generated electromagnetic fields, which we will call EMR, and wireless communication radiation that can be damaging to us. We'll talk about the health effects on children as well as the rest of us. And we'll talk about EMFs in the classroom, because it is my understanding that there are some educators here in the audience. And finally, we'll talk about some recommendations I have in which you can limit your exposure and the exposure to children. Now, this is an interesting topic because we're talking about a toxin that can't be smelt, it can't be seen, most people can't hear it, it's tasteless, and so it seems like it's not even there. That's in contrast to other forms of toxins, which you are likely familiar with, which can be either inhaled, ingested, or absorbed. Liquids and solids can be applied to the skin, they can be absorbed through the skin, they can be eaten and then absorbed through the gastrointestinal tract, and they can become toxic to us in that way. We can also inhale toxins. Here's somebody who's smoking, somebody who's vaping. The gases go into our lung, they penetrate into our bloodstream, and they can be toxic to the lung as well as to the blood. We're all familiar with this. What we may not be familiar with is the fact that energy can actually be toxic. And the route of exposure is through the skin. Energy and other frequencies of electromagnetic radiation can actually penetrate through the skin, and depending on their intensity and frequency, they can go all the way through the body or they can get trapped somewhere in the middle. Now, what is energy? Energy, also known as chi, is an abstract concept to some people. It can represent the heat and the warmth and the light we get from the sun. Energy can also be represented in flowing water or wind. And the bottom image on the left is called electromagnetic radiation, and we'll talk about this, but these are all different forms of energy. Energy is essential to life, and energy affects matter. The difference between ice cubes and this puddle of water here is that the water has more energy in it. If we apply energy to the ice, it will melt and form water. Energy is also important and necessary for the creation of life. The only thing that's different between this dead flower and this flower that is alive is that the flower that is alive has energy flowing through it, and it's in a conscious form. That is the secret to life. Now, studying electromagnetic fields is a multidisciplinary science that requires understanding some medicine, some biology, some engineering, and some physics. And it is really at the intersection of all of these four disciplines that we find the necessary material that we need to understand what EMS are doing to living systems. But first, let's just talk a little bit about energy, just in case you don't have this background. Energy travels in waves. And waves have a crest and they have a trough, and they flow back and forth over a baseline. And the distance between one trough and one trough, or one crest and one crest, is called the wavelength. And the amplitude refers to the height of the wave. Now, frequency is another important term that you need to understand. Frequency determines how many waves are passing by a given spot in a second. So imagine if you were sitting in a car at a railway crossing, and you saw this train going by in front of your windshield. If you could count the number of cars that went by let's say in a minute, that would be the frequency of the train that was going by. If those carts were perhaps half the size as they usually are, you would have twice as many cars go by, and therefore your frequency would double. Now, in electromagnetic fields, the speed of the wave is always the same. Doesn't matter what the frequency or the wavelength is. And so therefore, when the frequency increases, the wavelength decreases, and vice versa. In other words, the frequency is inversely proportional to the wavelength. There's a spectrum that we can talk about that goes from 1 hertz or 1 cycle per second all the way up through gamma radiation, which is 10 to the 21st cycles per second. And all of these different categories of waves are included in the electromagnetic spectrum, including light, which we use to see with our eyes. And I have a little yellow arrow here to demarcate where light is. We're concentrating mainly on the lower frequencies and the radio waves and microwaves in this talk. Electromagnetic radiation has 2 components, and that's why it's called electromagnetic radiation. It has an electrical component and the magnetic component. Now, life was created in the presence of electromagnetic radiation. We have the Earth's magnetic field, which is around us all the time, and it provides a framework for us. It provides a framework for some animals. It helps them navigate to go from place to place, such as insects and birds. The sun is also providing us a source of electromagnetic radiation in terms of light and heat, but we're only exposed to it, at least naturally, when we are being shown the sun, when we are on the part of the Earth that is actually facing the sun. So if you were living in a world without any forms of electricity, without any forms of exogenous radiation, you would only have light during a part of the day. At night, it would be dark. Oops. Now, we have, like I mentioned, physiological responses to static magnetic fields. The magnetic field helps animals, birds, bees, and sea turtles navigate through a process called magnetoreception. And humans too, some of us have a good sense of balance, of orientation. We can find our way through a maze or a city or some type of natural environment and just use our sense of magnetoreception to know what direction we're heading in. It also helps our cells in spatial mapping. It's called proprioception, is where the body is able to know where it is in space, and actually individual cells too use the magnetic field for orientation. So it's a very, very important thing to maintain a normal existence. We also are exposed to a daily oscillation of solar radiation, which I mentioned. And if you look at the sun in the morning, it's red. And then as the sky turns blue, the sun is up in the middle of the sky. And then at nighttime, it turns red again. So this is what we are used to seeing in terms of a normal solar radiation frequency. We see red, then blue, then red. And then it's time for bed, for sleep. And with this sunlight, we have different physiological functions. Our skin produces vitamin D. Our pupillary system responds. We can see. We have a process called circadian rhythm, which is key to our melatonin production, and which we will talk about in just a minute. And there are other functions too that are all necessary. They're tied into our exposure to sunlight. Now let's talk about the circadian rhythm just for a minute. The light comes into our eyes and it gets channeled through a separate pathway from the optic nerves, which is the nerves that we use to see. This separate pathway tells a part of our brain called the hypothalamus that there's light in the area, and that there's light outside. And it isn't until the light is gone that the brain is told that it's okay to produce melatonin. And melatonin is a very powerful antioxidant. It's some people call it the sleep hormone, but it is actually produced at nighttime in darkness. And if we have exogenous sources of light in our environment indoors, our melatonin production is put on hold or delayed. Now, this is one of the problems we have with our screens. So particularly blue light, which we get from our iPads and other tablets, the video monitors, computer screens, cell phones, the blue light that comes from these screens is a powerful inhibitor of melatonin production. And so it's important to avoid looking at a screen for at least 30 minutes before you go to sleep at night. Now, human-generated electromagnetic radiation is being used for wireless communication, and it's in this bandwidth here. From approximately 300 megahertz to 300 gigahertz is what's called microwave radiation, and radio frequency radiation encompasses a larger bandwidth. And many of the frequencies within this are now being used. I apologize, the screen, it keeps, for some reason, wanting to advance on its own. I'll have to keep trying to prevent that. Anyway, radio frequency radiation is a larger bandwidth, and there are many frequencies in this that are being used now for communication, particularly with the 5G network. Everyday gadgets are using wireless communication radiation. Laptops, wireless speakers, tablets, AirPods, and other devices that we can put on our body, wearables, smartwatches, and of course, Wi-Fi routers. These all emit wireless radiation. Now, what happens when you have an emitter? Let's say you find yourself in a room with some type of device that's emitting radiation. That radiation is being emitted from the device, and it goes in every direction. And when it hits an interface, it can reflect off that surface and continue back in the space that it was in. It can penetrate through the wall or the ceiling or the floor, and it can continue on its journey beyond. It can also penetrate into the body and continue on through the body, as I mentioned. Now, every point that is red in this diagram is a point where radiation is being absorbed. It isn't exactly like that, though, because the radiation isn't only coming out in a few lines and a few vectors from the source, it's actually coming out as a cloud of energy. And so it's infiltrating the environment completely. And in addition to the source, you're getting reflection off of the sources inside the room that you are sitting in. I hope that's clear. Here's another example of what happens when you have a wave of radiation and it hits an interface and it becomes absorbed. This was a model given to me by Professor Ken Chamberlain. Here we have some radiation, a wave of radiation coming into an object, and you can see that the height of the wave diminishes as it moves deeper and deeper into this object. But at the same time, the waves that are feeding this are becoming larger and larger, and that's because there is also reflection of a part of the wave back out into where it's coming from, and so those waves are getting larger and larger. Now, when we put a cell phone up to our head, or let's say AirPods or anything else, that radiation is penetrating into the head. It's also going out into the environment, and it's going as far away as the nearest cell phone tower. But if you look at this picture, this is and children have a higher water content, and they have an easier, the transmission of radiation is easier in their bodies because there's a higher water content. So you can see this graphic on the right is a model to show how deep the radiation goes in this child when she holds a cell phone up to her ear. Now, a study was done by the same scientists in Brazil. They looked at what happens in a classroom if all the kids are using a tablet. How much radiation is are each of the students being exposed to? And they found that, of course, as one would expect, the further the distance between students, the less radiation they would be getting from their neighbors. But most of the radiation was coming from their own laptop, and it was affecting their face and their hands. This doesn't take into account the fact that this room also would likely have a Wi-Fi router in it, which would also be exposing all of the students. Now, we know that radiation would also be coming into the classroom from neighboring classrooms. We know this is from, let's say, my cell phone. If I look on my cell phone and I don't have a Wi-Fi device in my house, but if I looked for a Wi-Fi, I would be getting signals from all of my neighbors, even if they were several houses down the street, because the radiation travels that far. And it's so strong that even if I'm in my house, with the doors closed and the windows closed, I can see their devices and their Wi-Fi routers from several houses away. Now, we know that the radiation diminishes over time. It's called the inverse square law. And so if you double the distance from the source of radiation, you are decreasing your exposure by 3/4 the amount. So distance is your friend, and that's something to keep in mind as we move forward in this discussion. So what is happening with all this human-generated radiation exposure, and what is it doing to us anyway? Well, we have a protective barrier called skin, and that protects us from some electromagnetic radiation, specifically light. We have a chemical in our skin called melanin, which absorbs the light frequencies and converts them to heat, and then it dissipates that heat back into the environment as infrared radiation. But the melanin only works for a certain bandwidth of frequencies. And interestingly, if you apply too much light to the skin, you can actually bypass the melanin, you can get past it. And if you look at these two images, the finger on the left is an image, and you can see that the light is reflecting off of the skin surface, and so you just see an opaque finger. But if you put the finger tip on a very bright light, that radiation will penetrate through the finger, and you can actually see the light coming through the finger. Now, the radiation has gotten an interesting, how do I phrase this? Radiation has become polarized in a sense. Physicists have said up until now that radiation that is less than somewhere between the middle of the ultraviolet spectrum, that it's safe, that it's considered non-ionizing radiation. And the radiation to the right of that mark is called ionizing radiation. And ionizing radiation is bad, non-ionizing radiation is good or harmless. But that's not exactly true for living systems. These studies were done on inorganic materials to see how much energy it would take to cause an atom to ionize. And what is ionization? It is the phenomenon that occurs when an electron is bombarded with so much energy that it is actually ejected from its atoms, from the orbit that it has around an atom. And as I mentioned, the energy keeping an electron in orbit is called the binding affinity for that electron. And it was determined on inorganic samples of say, a specific element. And these physicists would test the element, and they would give it a certain amount of energy to see how much radiation it would be needed, what frequency would be needed to eject that electron from the orbit. But in living systems, it doesn't work quite that way. We have a very complex arrangement of molecules called porphyrins, in which we have metal ions that are strategically placed in molecules to ease up the binding affinity of adjacent electrons in atoms. And if you think about chlorophyll, for example, the chlorophyll molecule enables light energy and sometimes even lower frequencies of light to cause an electron to get out of an atom's orbit and create sugars through the process of photosynthesis. That doesn't happen with ionizing radiation. But in any case, we can talk about what we know about ionizing radiation and what we've learned from exposing people to ionizing radiation in the field of radiology. And what I can tell you is that radiation exposure intensity is greatest at the exposed skin surface. And this is true for non-ionizing or ionizing radiation. If you have a cell phone, for example, put against your ear, the greatest radiation is going to be right at your skin surface. Radiation penetrates, scatters, and can be absorbed. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Radiation does not respect tissue planes. So there are different tissue planes in our body that try to protect some of our organs, particularly the brain and the testes in men. And radiation doesn't care about boundaries. It just goes right through them. There's also an important distinction between acute and chronic health effects. So there's a different effect from acute exposure and a different than there is from chronic exposure. And that's something that becomes very important when you consider that the population is now being exposed to non-ionizing radiation in the form of radio frequency wireless communication 24/7 in some cases. Also important to understand there are stochastic and deterministic effects of radiation, which we're going to talk about next. What are deterministic and stochastic effects of radiation? Deterministic effects are determined by cause. So for example, you can lay out in the sun for too long and get a sunburn. That's predictable. There's a cause and there's an effect, and it's very easy to tie one to the other. We know that if, for example, if someone is in the presence of very strong radiation, say a radioactive element, they will get a severe burn from the exposure. Now, stochastic effects are different. They're randomly determined, and they have a random probability distribution. But as the exposure increases, then the likelihood increases that you're going to have a stochastic effect. And in this case, I'm showing a picture of a melanoma, which is a very malignant skin tumor that you can also get from the sun. But whereas everybody who goes out in the sun for too long will get a sunburn, everybody who lays out in the sun for too long does not get a melanoma. It may be 1 out of 1,000. And yet it's a very, very serious cancer. And of course, people are, at least in the United States, are very concerned about their sun exposure now and wearing all kinds of protective products to prevent something like this from occurring. For that reason, we in radiology try to lower the exposure of our patients to that which is called as low as reasonably achievable, ALARA. Of course, if somebody has a need for a CAT scan, then we say that the benefit outweighs the risk. And so it's important that somebody has the CAT scan because perhaps they need the CAT scan to treat a medical issue. And it is worth the small risk that they would have of having a negative health effect from that scan. Now, electromagnetic radiation causes heating. That would be a deterministic effect. We know that. That's what our microwave ovens do. Our microwave ovens use radio frequency radiation to generate heat, and they cook our food. And interestingly, Wi-Fi routers use the same frequency as a microwave oven, just at a lower intensity. Now, this is the only effect that physicists and engineers are considering at this point. And so they are measuring the heat absorption by radiation, and that is how they're determining whether or not the technology is safe. They are not looking at any of the stochastic effects or potential stochastic effects. And there are formulas for measuring something called the specific absorption rate, or SAR. And if you do any research looking into the field, you will see that there are a lot of articles about the SAR, and different devices are rated based on their SAR, and there are limits imposed by government agencies based on SAR. It's all determining, limiting the amount of heat that you can be exposed to from a device. Now, the specific absorption rate is being generated with a phantom. It's not being created, it's not being assessed with human subjects and using cells. It's using a phantom that is filled with a type of jelly. And the jelly is supposed to simulate the inside of the head. And unfortunately, it doesn't take into account any of the reflection or the other things that happen with radiation that we discussed earlier, because there are no interfaces in this jelly. There's no anatomical structures. And so, but this is how it's being done. They're filling this phantom with jelly, they're putting a source of radiation from a device next to it, and they're trying to see what temperature the jelly goes up to based on how much radiation it's receiving, and that's how they're determining SAR. This is called dosimetry. You may also hear a term called the penetration depth. A lot of people say, oh, well, the radiation doesn't penetrate deeply. The penetration depth is only a few millimeters. What that means is that the penetration depth is that which is 37% of the radiation has been absorbed or reflected back into the environment. So at the penetration depth, you still have 63% of the original dose of radiation still in the soft tissues. And so that's something to consider when if somebody tells you, oh, it's only being absorbed, it's only going into a few millimeters. Lower frequencies in general, they penetrate deeper than higher frequencies, but they harness less energy. So for example, the older versions of cell phone communication used 800 megahertz. 800 megahertz is a relatively low frequency compared to, say, the frequencies of 5G, which can be up to in the 20s, 26, 35 gigahertz. It's a much, much higher frequency. And so the higher frequencies, they don't penetrate as deeply, but they deposit more energy into the skin. Okay. So ICNIRP is the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. As I mentioned, they only consider increases in temperature, and they allow a SAR of 2 watts per kilogram for the head and torso, and 4 watts per kilogram for limb exposure for the general public. In the United States, we have the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. They allow exposures up to 1.6 watts per kilogram. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of how they came up with those numbers, because to me it's irrelevant. It's totally ignoring the fact that right here, that non-ionizing radiation, that molecules are impacted by electric and magnetic fields. And so here's a schematic to show you what can happen with just water molecules when they're flowing in the direction of an electric or magnetic field. The actual bonds between the water molecules can separate. And this can affect the function of enzymes. It can change pH. It can change the boiling point of water and increase evaporation. It can have all kinds of physiological effects just from water molecules going through the electric and magnetic field. It can also impact ions, free radicals, and other molecules. We need to understand that our bodies are mostly composed of flowing water. and water is a dipole, a mini magnet. We are electromagnetic beings. We have energy going through our bodies, and that energy is being infiltrated and contaminated by this exogenous radiation that we're being exposed to. Special considerations in children: the radiation penetrates deeper, and there's greater permeability and what's a term called permittivity due to their higher water content of the tissues. Their nervous systems are not fully myelinated. Myelin is it's a fatty sheath that covers nerves to protect them. And so in children, the nerves are less protected. Their smaller bodies mean that the organ systems are at increased risk to exposure from frequencies and intensities that might not reach adult organs, particularly if somebody is overweight. Now, I want to talk about a few specific examples, and this one is particularly interesting. Electromagnetic fields are depolarizing red blood cell membranes in some people. Now, these slides were given to me by a friend and colleague, Magda Havis. She's a professor at Trent University in Canada. And on the left, she was demonstrating, these are slides from a technique called dark field microscopy. And you can see in this image, there are individual red blood cells that are floating freely in this solution on the slide. These actually, some of them are kind of stuck together a little bit, but they're much better than what happens to the right. Now, this is the same person, same day, after 10 minutes of exposure to a 2.45 gigahertz Wi-Fi router. And this person was 10 feet away from the router for 10 minutes, and their blood was taken again, and this is what it looked like. Here, all the blood cells are sticking to one another, and it's called rouleau formation. This was first described in 2005 by Sebastian et al.
Doctor,
Recently, I wrote a paper which was published in Frontiers in Cardiovascular Medicine, and I showed this phenomenon can be documented with ultrasound. Now, if you look on the left, this is an ultrasound image of the back of somebody's knee. It's called the popliteal vein, and it's a relatively large vein, and it's easy to see. And in this case, I'm going to show you, I'll play this video here. And you can see the vein is what we would term anechoic, meaning there are no echoes in it. You can't see the blood cells because they're smaller than the resolution of what you can see with the transducer that I'm using for this study. I was using a 10 megahertz transducer, and so because the speed of sound in soft tissue is 2,450 meters per second, the smallest object that you can see is 245 divided by 2, so it's 170 microns, and that would be equivalent of, a blood cell is about 2 microns thick, so you'd have to have about 85 blood cells stuck to each other if you were going to see them on this example. Now, what we did was we then exposed this patient to 5 minutes of a Wi-Fi router. I'm sorry, not a Wi-Fi router. We put a cell phone behind their knee for 5 minutes. And this is what happened to their blood. And you can see now that the blood vessel is filled with these white dots, and you can actually see the blood is trying to flow, but it's flowing very sluggishly. And that's because all the blood cells are stuck to one another. This is not happening to everybody, but we're doing studies and we're finding that it's happening to a lot of people. And this is an effect that people don't know about. And so it's a very, very important phenomenon because you don't want your blood cells to be stuck to one another. Blood cells carry oxygen to your cells, and they are supposed to pick up carbon dioxide from your cells and bring it back to your lungs. If the cells are stuck to one another, there's less surface area for gas exchange. And so that means that your body is not able to metabolize like it should because it's not getting the oxygen, that your cells aren't getting the oxygen that it needs in order to function properly. Now, there have been some physiological effects of rouleau formation documented in the literature. This is traditionally been associated with some very unusual diseases, such as conditions where you have too much protein in your blood. It was in my career, I saw rouleau formation rarely, maybe once or twice a year 30 years ago. Now it's relatively common. And so the excessive aggregation of red blood cells can increase susceptibility to microocclusions, microinfarcts, and microgangrene. It's important to understand this is not a blood clot. This is not blood clots. This is a reversible phenomenon because what's happening is the radiofrequency radiation is causing the red blood cell membranes to depolarize. And so instead of the cells actually repelling each other, which is what they're supposed to do, they don't have enough surface charge, and so they're sticking together. And so this can increase the risk for ischemic heart disease, diabetes, pre-thrombotic states, meaning that it can increase your risk for developing a blood clot. It's also increased risk for cancer, peripheral vascular disease, retinopathy, and strokes. Now, the cell membranes on red blood cells are not the only membranes that are being affected. Studies have been done and shown that electromagnetic fields are having effects on other cell membranes as well. And one of the major ones that has been talked about is that the radiation is causing the activation of ion channels in cell membranes. And that is causing an influx of ions from the extracellular fluid into the cell. And one of the most remarkable ion channels is that of the calcium channels, the voltage-gated calcium channels. And this was described by Martin Paul. It was a very impactful research. He showed that these ion channels are opening up in response to electromagnetic fields, and the cells are becoming flooded with calcium. Well, that is resulting in something called oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is when your cells become stressed out, in a sense. And there was a study, a review of many studies done by Yakimenko et al. In 2016. He looked at over 100 peer-reviewed studies, and he showed 93 of them confirmed that low-intensity radiofrequency radiation causes oxidative stress in biological systems. That's very damning. Now, what happens with oxidative stress? Oxidative stress is the accumulation of compounds called reactive oxygen species. They're chemicals that are looking for electrons. And those electrons can come from different aspects of the cell. So let's say you have a reactive oxygen species that needs an electron, and it takes it from the cell membrane itself. It can do that, and then the cell membrane becomes damaged, and it may affect its function. Oxidative stress can then also, these compounds can get electrons from proteins or enzymes. And when it does, they denature, they don't function properly anymore. And they can actually form protein-protein bonds, which may be explaining why we have such an increase in diseases such as Lewy body dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and amyloidosis, and all these diseases now that are being caused by abnormal protein-protein bonds in our cells, some in the brain, behind the blood-brain barrier. Oxidative stress can also cause DNA damage, mutagenesis, because the electrons, these reactive oxygen species, they can go into the nucleus and take electrons from DNA molecules. And they can also cause mitochondrial dysfunction, which causes the actual mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, to not function properly. It is not a surprise that this is a possibly human carcinogen. The IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, called non-ionizing radiation a possible human carcinogen and they're an arm of the World Health Organization. Now, there's a lot of different systems and cell lines that can be affected by radiation, and the basic thing that I want you to understand, we will go through a number of these systems briefly, but the most important thing for you to understand is that in order for a cell to become affected, it has to be exposed. So if, let's say, you've got an organ that's deep in the body and you have a source of radiation that's not reaching that organ, it's not going to be affected. The most impacted cell lines seem to be those that are traveling superficial to the skin, in the skin or just deep to the skin. And so those are the ones we're going to talk about mainly. And immune cells, top of the list. The radiation seems to have an impact on macrophages, natural killer cells. I apologize for this. As well as other lymphocytes and other immune cells. In general, they've shown that short-term exposures are causing an excitatory effect of the immune system, as if the immune system is trying to fend off something that's attacking it. And then chronic exposure is causing an inhibitory effect. And in psychiatry, they call that the learned helplessness response, where you keep fighting, then all of a sudden you just give up and you just let it attack me. And so that seems to be what's happening to the immune system. There's an impact on the eyes. Cell phones can cause dry eye syndrome, blurry vision, inflammation. It can affect tear quality. There's an interesting phenomenon called leaky iris, in which the vascular integrity of the iris is being damaged by microwave exposure. And this effect is exacerbated with some of the medications that we give to treat glaucoma. There's also damage to the epithelium covering the lens from non-thermal radiation. Cataracts, we're not sure what the effect is going to be over the long term, but this is not causing significant heat, and that heat is what has been shown to cause cataract damage. But leaky iris is in particular, I think, very, very a scary phenomenon, and I think it is a reason why a lot of people now are having trouble seeing. EMFs in the breast tissue. This was a very interesting case report by West et al. In 2013. He had 4 cases in which he showed women who were less than 40 and they had multifocal breast carcinoma in the breast, where they had a cell phone that they used to keep underneath their brassiere. And all the cancers were located deep to the cell phone. None of the women had a family history of carcinoma. They were BRCA1 and BRCA2 negative, and they were all extensive intraductal component and infiltrating ductal carcinomas. There was a case control study by Shi in 2020 that showed that women who carry the cell phone in their breast are at increased risk for breast cancer. If they carry it near their chest, there's a 5-fold increase. So it's very important to tell women, especially girls, don't carry your cell phone in your brassiere or in your shirt. The thyroid gland is a very superficial gland, and it's extremely radiosensitive. That's why if you go for a radiology test, you'll see the radiologist wearing a thyroid shield, because they're trying to protect their thyroid gland. There have been experiments done on mice, rats, and also on medical students, showing that cell phone exposure causes thyroid dysfunction. And I don't know how it is in Chile, but in the United States, it seems like everybody now is having thyroid problems. And there's a condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which seems to be the same sort of hyperstimulation effect, where the thyroid gland becomes stimulated and irritated and overactive, and then it burns out, and then the person becomes hypothyroid. And I will not be surprised if you learn one day that Hashimoto's thyroiditis is being caused by cell phone radiation. Now, thyroid is an important hormone. It can affect your weight, your immunity, your heart rhythm. It has a lot of systemic effects, and so just the effect of the thyroid gland alone is important. We don't want to impact or negatively impair our immune system because of the thyroid dysfunction. And in addition, it can cause cardiac arrhythmias, which is also becoming more and more common, isn't it? Electromagnetic fields have been shown to affect sperm development. There's been an association with decreased motility, and it can affect sperm viability and lower sperm concentration. There's also been a report that electromagnetic fields can result in decreased testosterone levels. And this is why it's important to tell your male patients not to put a cell phone in their pocket. You need to understand that the cell phone is irradiating even when it's not being used. It pings the network every second, sometimes multiple times in a second. It's pinging, it's sending out a pulse that is traveling as far away as the nearest cell phone tower, and it's trying to update apps and get texts and all kinds of other information from the network. And so it's important, even if you have the cell phone turned off, you should put it in your hand or carry it off your body. Now, I don't know if this is going to work, but this was to show you. Let's see if I can get this to work. This is another simulation, and it's to show you what the brain looks like when you turn a cell phone on. And so this is it's taking sections through the brain, and then we're going to turn the cell phone on, and you can see the radiation penetrate into the brain from the cell phone. And this was another modeling experiment that was given to me from Professor Kent Chamberlain. Electromagnetic fields are causing neuropsychiatric symptoms. It's very common now to hear people can't sleep, or if they do fall asleep, they wake up in the middle of the night. They don't know why. People have headaches, pressure behind the ears, sensations of electric shock, dizziness, and vertigo is a common thing. Tinnitus is extremely common, ringing in the ears. People are having short-term memory loss, a thought block, can't think of what was it I wanted to think, what did I come into this room for, what was I looking for, that kind of thing. It's also causing melatonin suppression. It's interesting because I mentioned earlier that blue light causes melatonin suppression. Well, so does electromagnetic radiation exposure. And for that reason, I always tell people, turn your Wi-Fi router off at night. Make sure your cell phone's not in your bedroom while you're trying to sleep. There's been a lot of behavioral dysfunction lately, increased anxiety and depression. Of course, our children, there's been an anxiety and depression epidemic. People have blamed social media. Is it Snapchat, is it Instagram or TikTok, or is it actually the carrier signals that are transmitting those social media apps to the cell phone? I think it's probably a combination of both. This book came out, I think last year, The Anxious Generation. It really is an excellent book. I suggest you read it. It talks about how smartphones have caused a significant decline in adolescent mental health. It's causing isolation of individuals, children from their families and each other, a loss of tangible real-world experiences, and an increase in anxiety and depression. I thought the book was great. He is only missing the link with radiation. He's talking mainly about addiction and the social impact or the impact of social media. I would love this book if the next time he does a version, he addresses the impact of electromagnetic radiation, because not only is the addiction itself a problem, but the addiction causes even more radiation exposure. Studies have shown that there is an increased association with gliomas and glioblastoma from cell phone use. Gratefully, people are changing their habits, and I don't see this as often as I used to. Now I see a lot of people speaking with the speaker mode on so that they talk to the phone and they don't put the phone up to their head. I would recommend that this never be done. You should never put the cell phone up to your head. You saw what it looks like on that demo. There's also been a discussion about this radiofrequency radiation affecting heart rhythm and heart rate variability. And studies have shown that it does affect heart rate variability. And you may know that we are in an atrial fibrillation epidemic. It's becoming incredibly common. I'm seeing pacemakers being put in and wireless pacemakers being put in younger and younger people all the time. This was a 49-year-old patient. This study by Parizek in 2023 showed that high-frequency EMF, and that's 2.45 gigahertz, that's the frequency emitted by a typical router, it can cause a shift in the autonomic regulation towards sympathetic overactivity. That makes people anxious and shake, and it's also becoming more and more common in the population. There's a condition called electromagnetic radiation syndrome. That's the new name for it. It was called electrohypersensitivity syndrome. There's a bunch of symptoms that go along with this, and some people are so sickened in the presence of electromagnetic radiation that they can't stand to be in the same room with a device that's being emitted. There's all kinds of people out there. Some people aren't affected at all. Some people are being affected, but they're not aware of it. Some people are being affected and they are aware of it, but they can tolerate it to some degree. And then there are people out there who just cannot tolerate exposure at all. And these are the symptoms. And I got this list from Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe, who's a trauma surgeon from England, who specializes in this. So what do we still not know? We don't actually know what the penetration depths are for different types of radiation. And we really don't know what the effects are of, let's say, body habitus, if somebody's overweight or if they've dehydrated versus they're well hydrated. Like, is there a difference in the depth of penetration if somebody forgot to have a glass of water in the morning? We don't really know. We don't know how much radiation is needed to cause oxidative stress. It's probably individual to each person's ability to detoxify and remove the reactive oxygen species. And those will be individual to each person, but also day to day, because depending on what other toxins we're exposed to and our general state of health at that moment, we may tolerate more or less of the oxidative stress. We don't know what's happening to complex modulated waveforms. We didn't talk much about modulation, but modulation is the manipulation of these waves to carry information. And when they hit the skin, if the carrier wave is, say, a very high frequency that the physicists and the engineers would tell you is only going a few millimeters into the skin surface, it's possible that the modulated waves that are superimposed on the carrier wave are penetrating deeper. And there are a few biophysicists that I've talked to who believe that that is what's happening, and that there are extremely low fields of radiation that penetrate very deeply that are superimposed on these high frequency carrier waves. We don't know. More testing needs to be done. We don't know if energy is being transmitted through cellular structures or are they only going through cell membranes. Not sure. And we don't know if there's an impact on the global coherence of an organism from localized exposure. There's been a lot of interesting, there are a lot of interesting products that are being put on the market, little devices that people say will make your energy coherent. They counteract the effects of the radiation. Some of them, people claim that they work. So, and you can do something called strength testing where you can show if somebody holds a cell phone in their arm that they become weaker just by the presence of holding a cell phone, their physical strength drops. So is there an energetic coherence to the whole organism that is being affected by the localized impact of the cell phone? I suspect there is. So what can we do in classrooms? First of all, I know in the United States, we have, there's definitely been a move to wireless. All the kids now are getting iPads to do their work on. And so every room has a Wi-Fi router and all of the iPads are emitting radio frequency radiation. If I could wave my magic wand and say, this is what we have to do from now on, it would be to disconnect all of the wireless routers and replace all of them with Ethernet cables and hardwire all the devices and peripherals. Every device can be hardwired with a cable, like I've demonstrated here. And when you do that, you have to then turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on your device so that the device isn't looking for a network, even though it's plugged in. Peripherals need to be hardwired. Now this is a little demonstration I'm going to show you. This is a wireless mouse from an Apple product. And the detector that I'm using it's an EMF detector. It detects radio frequency radiation. And you're going to see it has a light display and it's going to give numbers. It has a peak, max, and average number there. And it's going to show you the amount of radiation. The unit is microwatts per meter squared. Background should be less than 3, ideally. And that's what it was before all this technology came out. But look what happens when I survey this wireless mouse. So it's just sitting there on the desk, it's not being used, and yet every second it's sending out another pulsation with a maximum up to 2,440 microwatts per meter squared. Whereas that's not a huge amount of radiation, it's not necessary, so I recommend that you hardwire all of your peripherals. It really is not necessary to be exposed to all that extra radiation mindlessly, really. Typical bedrooms, we have at least one source. Some people have more than one source, 2 or 3 sources of emission. And while you're trying to sleep, your body's being irradiated. It affects your melatonin production, like I said, and your cells are all being exposed to radio frequency radiation when you're trying to sleep. I recommend you disconnect all these products, take them out of your bedroom, and lower your exposure as much as possible. What do you tell parents? It's important for them to decrease their children's exposure to all forms of EMF as much as possible, and tell them about the inverse square law. You just keep things as far away as you possibly can. To put the Wi-Fi router in the basement or in a room far away from where people spend most of their time if you have to have a Wi-Fi router, or better yet, hardwire from the router and use Ethernet cables for all of your gadgets and your TVs. If you have to have a Wi-Fi router at the house, turn it off every night. Everyone in the house should be able to sleep in an electromagnetically clean environment. No electronics near the bed, and preferably kept out of the bedroom. And although we didn't talk about antioxidants in this talk, it is something to consider to increase the daily intake of antioxidants, particularly vitamin C, because as we're being exposed to more and more sources of radiation that are causing oxidative stress, antioxidants combat that. Healthier cell phone use. As I mentioned, most people now are using speaker mode, which is great. Some people also use these AirPods, and they connect with a Bluetooth device from their cell phone. I don't recommend that. You don't want to have radiation being emitted right into your ear canal. I don't know if you're familiar with the anatomy of the ear, but there really isn't much separating your external auditory canal from the temporal lobe of your brain. In fact, the radiation can go right through your tympanic membrane and the oval and round windows, affect your cochlea, and get right into the brain. So I really do not recommend putting AirPods into your ears. Don't carry a live cell phone in your pocket or in your bra. We talked about that. Turn off antennas you're not using. So as I mentioned, if you're using a phone and you're not connected to a device via Bluetooth, then turn off the Bluetooth antenna. If you're not hooked into a Wi-Fi network, turn off the Wi-Fi antenna. If you're using Wi-Fi calling and you're in a place where you can use Wi-Fi calling, then turn off the cellular data. So you don't have to have all the antennas on at the same time. That'll reduce your exposure. And whenever you're carrying the phone from one place to another, carry it off your body, and preferably put it in airplane mode. I wrote an article that was published in the Huffington Post. It was a newspaper here that's no longer around. Are you slowly going deaf exercising with those earbuds? And what I was describing is that loud noises can cause the vasculature that supplies the cochlea to shrink, to constrict. And if you're exercising, that's taking blood away from your ear in addition. So if you compound the effects of exercising and then the loud noise, you're doubling your risk for something called noise-induced hearing loss, which is becoming deaf slowly over time. And so now that we know what's happening with rouleau, that's a third reason that you could be causing a significant problem to your ear. If you're exercising and you're one of those people who's going into rouleau and you're listening to loud music, increase your risk for noise-induced hearing loss. So I really don't recommend that at all. Now, Disconnect is a book that was written by the Environmental Health Trust founder. That's the organization that I'm now a vice president in for clinical research and scientific research and clinical affairs. Deborah Davis, she's been a real pioneer in this field. Well, she's a wonderful speaker, and she's a delight to know. Her book is excellent. She provides details on how radio frequency poses a significant health risk, many of which we discussed here. She talks about the industry's playbook, very much like the tobacco industry and the asbestos industry, and how they create doubt in order to keep it going, keep kicking the can down the road. She teaches simple methods to lower RF exposure, and she stresses the need for policy changes around the world. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. And there are some organizations. Our organization, the Environmental Health Trust, we have a new website that's going to be released soon. It's a great resource if you're interested in learning more about this topic. There's an organization called FIRE. If there are any physicians in the group today, this is a group called Physicians Health Initiative for Radiation and Environment. It's a great resource as well. There's a database done by a team out in Australia called the Oceania Radio Frequencies Scientific Advisory Association, or ORSA. It's excellent. There are literally tens of thousands of articles in the scientific literature talking about the health effects and the biological effects of radio frequency radiation. This is not a fringe science. And it's not that there are 1 or 2 or 3 papers on this subject. There are tens of thousands of papers. So if you are interested, I highly recommend that you start taking some dives into the literature and see what you can find. And this Oceania Radio Frequency Scientific Advisory Association is a great reference. You can do searches and find all the papers that were published to talk about any category that you want to look for. Finally, there's an organization called Physicians for Safe Technology. They are also a group of physicians in the United States, and they're a wonderful resource as well. So thank you for your attention. I hope this was helpful to you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias, doctor Brown, por esta interesante charla. Información que es esencial para la ciudadanía, para todas las personas que estamos interesados en la salud también. Voy a revisar las preguntas en este instante. Ya. La primera pregunta dice, ¿hay cosas paliativas que puedan hacerse, como por ejemplo el earthing o poner el modo avión en la noche? ¿Evita la radiación al dejar el celular en el velador, por ejemplo? ¿Qué otras medidas paliativas podríamos tener? También leí por ahí el aislar una habitación, por ejemplo, o aislar el cuerpo de alguna forma.
There are many different methods for shielding. There are paints, fabrics, other materials that you can use, window films, other materials that you can use to block radio frequency from coming into a specific room. But they're not that easy to use. And then once you're in the room, you have to be careful that you don't turn on the device, because then they reflect the radiation back to you and you become overexposed in that way. But there are shielding products on the market that you can use. If you have, let's say you have an antenna outside that's producing a lot of radiation that's coming in through your windows, which I happen to have on my house, and I had to put up shielding film on my windows, and it blocks out a significant amount of the radiation, so that helps. Earthing's an interesting phenomenon. And I do believe that there's definite benefits to it. We haven't proven it yet, but I am a firm believer that we need to dissipate our currents into the earth as much as we can. We're supposed to. We're not supposed to be isolated from the earth. And so whether you're touching a plant, I mean, you can earth just by touching the leaves of a plant or a tree, because the current will go that way into the soil. We're going to look at earthing as a possible mechanism to prevent rouleau formation, and it may be that helps. We don't know. There's a lot of research that needs to be done in this field. The first thing is to acknowledge that it's having these effects. Other palliative measures, antioxidants I mentioned, are very important. I think if somebody is being exposed to a lot of radiation, they should take antioxidants like vitamin C, vitamin D. It's very important to keep electronics out of the bedroom. The sleep is very important, because one of the most important antioxidants is melatonin. So if you're blocking yourself from producing melatonin at night by being exposed to radiation, you will get sick over time.
Perfecto. También aquí preguntan si hay algún material donde uno pueda guardar el teléfono, por ejemplo, en un bolsillo, en una cartera, algún metal. Pues se ha hablado de repente del aluminio, de hacer láminas de aluminio que aíslen el aparato.
Excellent question. If you're shielding the device to that extent that it's not radiating, you're not going to get signal with it. So there are products on the market that will allow you to transport a cell phone and will block all the EMF. But if you want to use the cell phone, you've got to take it out of the sleeve, of course. And if you just want to make your own with aluminum foil does seem to block the radiation. So, but it's interesting. When I first got into this, I thought that I could. When I first got interested in this field, I had a Wi-Fi router, and I thought, oh well, if I just put some aluminum foil over the antennas, that would be enough to block some of the radiation so that it wouldn't be affecting me and my children as much. And so I did that. I put a piece of aluminum foil over the Wi-Fi router, and I went to check on it a few weeks later, and there were holes that had been burnt through the aluminum foil from where the antennas had been blasting the radiation. It caused burn marks and holes in the aluminum foil. So you have to be careful.
Claro, podría ser hasta contraproducente si aumenta la emisión en los orificios justamente. Y otras preguntas, por ejemplo, en cantidades. ¿Cuál sería la distancia que debemos estar de la radiación, por ejemplo, de un teléfono, de una antena, en un barrio, por ejemplo, de nuestra casa? ¿Cuál sería una distancia prudente de distintos aparatos, los más comunes, por ejemplo?
There was a study from Brazil, and they looked at cancer rates from people who live near antennas, and I believe it was 600 meters was where they saw that people started getting more cancers. But of course, that's one effect. I don't know. There really isn't data on anything else. We don't know, as I mentioned at the end of my talk, we really don't know at what exposure these things become so out of control that we go into oxidative stress. It's a very hard question to answer, and sometimes less is worse than more. So if you have a very low background level of radiation, sometimes that can affect your body's functions even more so than if you have a big assault. It seems counterintuitive, but it's something that we've noticed. So but I would say, in general, try to turn things off. Like if you're not using devices, turn them off. Don't keep things on overnight. When devices are turned off, you're not getting any radiation exposure from them, then you're fine. And as long as your body has some time to heal, this is something that I can mention also in terms of remediating devices. If you live in an area where there are outdoor antennas, or you're in an apartment building and your neighbor has a Wi-Fi and you turn yours off, but you're still receiving the radiation from your neighbor, they do have these sleep canopies. And actually, I use one because I have neighbors that have Wi-Fi routers on, and I couldn't sleep until I bought this canopy. And the fabric of the canopy is made of silver and gold threads, and it effectively functions as a Faraday cage. And so the radiation hits this canopy and then it dissipates. And inside the canopy, the levels of radiation are very, very, very low, less than 3 microwatts per meter squared. And so you can sleep soundly in that. The only exception is the 5G antenna. And they're putting these small cells up in different neighborhoods, at least in the city where I live. There's one right across the street from me. And when this antenna went on the high band of the 5G network, which is the bands that are over 8 gigahertz, the high frequencies, they penetrate right through the canopy. So in order to sleep, you have to block those fields with a more powerful, a more opaque or metallic shield, in a sense, because it won't be blocked by the typical canopies that we're using. But I highly recommend that if you have trouble sleeping at night and you think it's because of EMF, my first suggestion would be get a detector, You can get a cheap one on the internet, and it doesn't have to be expensive, just something that will give you an idea of what your exposure is, and then try to get some shielding over your bed and see if you can create what I call a sleep sanctuary, where you can sleep without being disturbed by the radiation.
Perfecto, gracias. También nos preguntan de otros métodos de amortiguación, por ejemplo, el contacto con la naturaleza, utilizar ropas de algodón o de fibras naturales, o tener casas más de madera, por ejemplo, no tener casas hechas de metal, por ejemplo, o el exceso de plástico. También el consumo de antioxidantes también lo están poniendo acá, pero la pregunta en general va a estos otros métodos también de, más que revertir, también como amortiguar un poco la exposición a través de hacer tierra, ¿no? Hacer contacto más con elementos naturales con nuestro cuerpo. Si eso está estudiado, o si nos va a servir.
No, there are no studies at this point that I'm aware of. It's important for me to relate to you that up until now, there's been no real biomarker to assess if somebody's being affected by radio frequency radiation. What that means is if somebody says, for example, oh, I have a headache, I have ringing in my ears, I'm dizzy, I can't remember things, there's no way to quantify that. There's no way to say you didn't have it and now you have it. The first test that we're showing cause and effect is the rouleau study that I showed you, those images, those videos. That's the first thing that we've actually put out there that we can say this is a cause and effect. Otherwise, they're non-specific lab tests. There's Belpomme in France came up with a list of different biochemical markers in the blood from people that are exposed to electromagnetic fields that show that they're in oxidative stress. But oxidative stress is a non-specific occurrence. It's a natural cellular response when the cell becomes kind of out of control. And so just showing that there's been oxidative stress is not specifically saying that the oxidative stress is from radiofrequency radiation. Because of that, there's no way to prove that any techniques are effective in relieving the whatever it is that's causing the effect. Does that make sense? If you don't have a way to prove that there's a condition, you don't have a way to prove that the condition's been helped. And so that's been the problem up to now. So we're working on biomarkers. We're trying to get specific criteria that we can say, yes, this person went into rouleau, this person, had a problem with their eyes. And then we used these different products and we saw that effect was negated. They no longer went into rouleau when they were earthed, or they didn't go into rouleau when they took whatever supplement, or if they were exposed to some type of herb or plant. We will know that data eventually, but we don't know that yet.
Una pregunta muy interesante es si en algunos lugares, en algunos países, habrán productores de tecnologías responsables, porque habría evidencia de que se puede fabricar tecnología que nos pueda comunicar y que no es dañina, pero no se encuentra en el mercado y hay que mandarla a fabricar de manera artesanal. ¿Hay algún conocimiento de este otro tipo de tecnología que se puede desarrollar?
I know that cell phones do not need to be producing as much radiation as they do to be effective, and that when you look at the cell phone and you see how many bars you have, you don't need to have 5 bars to have effective communication. So all the devices could be turned down significantly in the amount of radiation that they emit, and they would still function fine. There are different countries have different exposure limits. So for example, I believe in Russia, their exposure limit is 1/100th of what it is in the United States. Ours is 10 microwatts per meter squared. I believe theirs is 0.1. Maybe, and I'm sorry, I think it's 1 microwatt per meter squared, and I think China's is 3. There's Bulgaria, I believe, is 1/100th of watts per meter squared. So different countries have different exposure limits, and so they're protecting their population more than others. The industry, it's not really about talking on the phone anymore, though. It seems that they're trying to use this technology to control devices, to control appliances, to control energy grids, to control appliances in your home, to turn your lights off if you're using too much electricity. I mean, they're trying to use this technology to basically create an energetic network that will give people control over all of the electronics everywhere. And it's kind of frightening, but that's really, I think, why they're trying to build this up to such an intensity, because the more power you have, the more of the network you have, the more you can do with it. It's not just about communication.
Interesante. Otras preguntas también, como para disminuir las emisiones, por ejemplo, utilizar el modo de navegación mientras uno maneja es menos peligroso que usar el teléfono directamente en el auto o en un avión o en un tren, por ejemplo. Otra pregunta, si existe la magnetita endógena que aparece con el envejecimiento del humano, ¿podría tener repercusiones fisiológicas con los trenes de onda milimétricas? Y la otra es la zeolita, también como método de mitigación.
I'm not familiar with zeolite, but I am familiar with shungite, and there was another, is it moldavite? I think there were 2 minerals that I've been familiar with. People say, again, this is kind of the idea of energetic coherence. Obviously, if you've got a piece of a mineral in your hand or in your pocket, it's not going to prevent radiation from penetrating into your skin, right? I mean, it's just not going to. However, if you're talking about the effect on your homeostasis or your energetic signature, which we all have our own energetic signature, and it's being distorted by this interference, this electromagnetic interference, some people call it, well, then it's possible that these stones or these minerals can then kind of regroup and reshape and make you coherent again. And therefore, you as an organism regain your strength and you regain your harmony. But the cellular effects, I'm not sure if there's an improvement or not. I don't think it would make sense for there to be. It doesn't make sense to me that, for example, the women with breast cancer who put their cell phone here, in their bra, I think they still would have gotten cancer even if they had a piece of shungite in their pocket. I don't know, but it seems to me that there's 2 different things going on here. There's the direct exposure, and then there's the secondary effects on the organism's energy signature or coherence. And then what was the first question? The first part of that was. I can't hear her.
Ana, estás muteada.
Perdón. Se preguntaban por el modo de navegación, que supongo que es el modo avión,
Oh,
¿no?
yeah.
Claro, sí, realmente es útil ponerlo en modo avión, por lo que yo vi en la presentación también. Y si hay algunas diferencias
Yes.
entre el Bluetooth, el LoRa, 2.4G, Wi-Fi, etcétera. Y me parece que esas son todas las
Okay.
preguntas.
Perdón, Ana. Es
¿Mm?
modo de navegación, que es distinto de modo avión,
Acláralo, por favor,
en el auto.
en el auto. Es el modo de navegación del auto. Perfecto, entiendo.
Yes. If you're in airplane mode, you've downloaded the map, and then the computer on your phone is navigating you, and you're using the GPS antenna so that the car knows the GPS is always turned on, and so that'll tell your phone where you are in space, and so it'll use the memory of the map to know where you're going. So yeah, that's a safe way to travel. And I should mention that the cell phones, the intensity of the cell phone varies depending on your location. So I'm glad the person asked this question. So for example, if you're in an elevator and you're trying to use your phone, the intensity of the radiation from the phone is going to amplify so that the radiation can get through the elevator doors, through the building, and reach the network. And so you're being exposed to much more radiation when you use a phone in a confined space like an elevator or in a car with the windows up than you would if you were, say, outside. And that's always something to be aware of. You don't want to use your phone in those types of situations. Now, in terms of the frequency of the Bluetooth and the cell phone and 4G and all that, we're talking about similar frequencies. We're talking about different amplitudes. So the intensity of the radiation from Bluetooth is much less because you're only trying to communicate with an object that might be 10 or 20 feet away, as opposed to and a Wi-Fi router would be within a couple of 100 feet away, and then your cell phone, of course, can transmit miles, so or kilometers. So it's a difference in amplitude.
Me parece que esas son las... Mira, aparece dos preguntas sobre las antenas satelitales como Starlink. ¿Qué efectos se han visto? ¿Cuáles podrían tener? Que son a mayor distancia, ¿no?
Well, we're very nervous about the effects because, of course, there's no way to escape them. They're going to be blanketing the Earth with radiation. The intensities are very, very low, at least if you're far away from the sites where they gather data. But I don't know. I really don't know what the effect's going to be. It's certainly disturbing the Earth's electromagnetic quality. You know, we're not supposed to be exposed to radiation like that during the night, and neither the plants or the animals. I mean, nothing's supposed to be receiving. We're supposed to have a time to rest. You know, when I first started speaking about this topic, I would ask people, what do you think it would be like to live on an Earth that had two suns? You know, because that's kind of what we're creating. You know, we're creating a world where the sun's never going to set. We're always going to be exposed to energy, and that's just going to wipe people out. It's going to wipe living systems out, trees, animals, bees, birds. Everything's going to just get like wiped out, and I think it's not looking good. But that's kind of my political soapbox. I'm not a fan of the internet, but it would be a much lower intensity than, say, from these poles that are being put up in our cities and towns, and these masts that are being put up in our neighborhoods. It'd be a much lower intensity. But again, as I mentioned earlier, we don't know if lower intensity necessarily means less of a physiological impact. It might have more of a physiological impact. So the studies have not been done.
Muchas gracias, doctor Brown. Karina, ¿tú quieres decir algo para cerrar?
Muchas gracias, Ana. Mi nombre es Karina Bacaseller, yo soy médico, soy parte de la agrupación Unidos por Tecnología Responsable y quiero agradecerle de corazón al doctor Brown, de parte de mi organización y de mí personalmente, por esta exposición brillante en la que yo personalmente aprendí mucho. Y quiero decirles que para mi organización, eh, siempre Environmental Health Trust, la organización de la cual él es vicepresidente, y especialmente la doctora Debra Davis, siempre han sido como organización una luz inspiradora, una estrella que guía nuestro camino como organización y como estrella que guía nuestra organización en lo ideal es como cuidar la salud de las personas y cuidar el medio ambiente en relación a las radiaciones electromagnéticas. Y lo otro es que nosotros perseguimos la verdad y que la verdad no esté influenciada por ningún interés que no sea el bienestar de las personas, del planeta, de la naturaleza. Y yo quisiera como agradecer especialmente al doctor Brown porque con su exposición hemos visto como una exposición no solamente brillante, sino que él es como una cualidad de persona muy amable y muy humilde. Y eso muestra que él es una persona de verdad grande. Yo estoy muy agradecida por tener contacto con él. Lo otro es que quisiera, en nombre de mi organización, decirles que nos encantaría que el resultado de este seminario fuese que la gente tome tanta conciencia de lo que es el efecto de las radiaciones inalámbricas, especialmente en los niños, que se genere un movimiento, ojalá en Chile y ojalá en el mundo, para que así como se está luchando contra las pantallas en los celulares, en los colegios, es muy bueno. Ojalá también se pueda sacar el wifi de los colegios. Eh, Nosotros estaríamos muy felices si esto fuese un impulso para lograr eso. Y queremos como organización ofrecer a los asistentes, especialmente si son directores de colegios, si son médicos, gente influyente en la educación de los niños, que podamos organizar más seminarios. Nosotros ofrecemos la posibilidad de organizar seminarios a ojalá miles de padres que quieran como leones defender la salud de sus hijos y quieran sacar el wifi. Quiero decirles que nosotros estamos muy agradecidos de la presencia de ustedes y, y creo que con este interés que ustedes han mostrado, ah, tenemos esperanza de poder luchar contra esta situación y que la tecnología esté al servicio del ser humano y no el ser humano al servicio de la tecnología. Nosotros no vamos en contra de la tecnología, pero queremos una tecnología saludable. Muchas gracias a todos. Gracias, doctor Brown.
Thank
Gracias.
you. Thank you.
Bueno, creo que no quedó más consultas y quedamos, yo creo, todos muy impresionados también por toda la información que hay y que no siempre es conocida. Y también tenemos que ser conscientes de que si bien no podemos eliminar esta exposición, podemos minimizarla y a través del cableado, de apagar lo que no vamos a usar, no pasar el teléfono a los niños. Y todo eso yo creo que cada uno y en conjunto en nuestras agrupaciones, nuestras organizaciones o nuestros establecimientos donde trabajamos, poder ir generando también ideas para ir minimizando este daño que que puede estar produciendo estas emisiones electromagnéticas, que estamos viendo que va a ser muy difícil escapar, pero sí podemos minimizar y aumentar la conciencia. Creo que es importante también que, como dice Karina, sepamos realmente cuál es la verdad y cuáles son los daños que está produciendo todo esto. Y por eso agradecemos también todas sus investigaciones, doctor, que ojalá mucha más gente siga investigando y difundiendo también a través de estas charlas. Karina.
Cortito, quiero decirles que los que se quieran poner en contacto con nuestra organización eh, para organizar más seminarios y poder iniciar este movimiento en contra de los wifi en el colegio, eh, pueden escribirnos al mail. Ana María, tú puedes escribir el mail en el chat para que todos vean el mail al que puedan dirigirse, que es contacto@uxtr.cl, creo que es.
org.org.
Publicó, de hecho, Karina.
Ah,
Escribió.
bueno, muchas gracias. Perdón por el olvido.
Sí, sí pueden poner también la página del doctor Brown en el chat también.
Ana, ¿tú preguntaste por una página específica del doctor Brown?
Sí, pero no, es que tenía la duda si era, el
Ah,
doctor tiene la página de EHT, no, ehtrust.org.
I mean, I have a website too, but that's the one, yeah, ehtrust.org, and mine is robbrownmd.com. I can put that down.
Esa era la que quería.
Very good, thank you.
Muy bien, muchas gracias a todos por su asistencia. Espero que podamos repetir estas charlas y poder seguir con este trabajo. Muchas gracias a todos. Nos despedimos.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Muchas gracias. Chao, chao.